of exceptions, sometimes we find unexpected errors. Sometimes our functions, we don't pass the right data or something like that, and we return a different result. That is okay. Imagine that you have, say, a function that's gonna look up a user in a database, so you pass it the username. If the username doesn't exist, then it will probably somehow return you something that tells you that that wasn't a user. Either returns null or has an extra return value or something like that. However, sometimes you have a true exception, something that shouldn't happen. You try to connect to the database and the server is not there, or the network is not there, right? So that is something that you shouldn't deal with it in the normal process many times. And so Java and many other object-oriented programming languages have structured exception handling. Besides the normal flow of your program, you can throw an exception and hope that somebody above you will call it. So, the general class is exception, and so when you are going to throw an exception, you would use the keyword throw, and then put the object that you want to throw. Normally, you would be throwing a new exception, and you can put a message. You can also have subclasses of exception that signal different things, and we'll see. When you call something that can throw an exception, you would do try. Here you would put the code that may or may not throw an exception, and then you would use catch to catch those exceptions, and then you would use a finally block for stuff that must be done regardless of whether there was an exception or not. If you throw an exception, you should declare in your class, in your function or method, that you throw that exception. So you would do throws exception. There is runtime exception is an exception to this rule in that you don't have to declare that you throw it. And so let's go look at examples, right? We have something like this. It's just my normal class, and I'm using Eclipse because public static void throw if true. And we passed a boolean that we say whether we want it to throw something or not. It's a really dumb function, but if should throw, but it allows you to illustrate the exceptions, right? You wouldn't write something like this, but then I'm gonna throw a new runtime exception. Bad stuff happened. And then I can have my public static void main string args. And in here, I can do stuff. I'm gonna just call this guy. Throw if true, true. So when I save and run this thingy, it throws that exception, right? And so it tells me there was an exception. The class, the type of that exception is runtime exception. This is the message, bad stuff happened. This is the default behavior for when nobody catches that exception. And it's very useful because it actually tells me what happened, right? The throw if true function from the example 2.java and actually it's in line 8. So that is fairly useful, right? Now notice that we threw a runtime exception. If we try to throw an exception rather than a runtime exception, and we try to compile this, Java complains. Why? because I need to declare that I throw this thing. So I need to do here throws exception. If I could type. Once I do that, it works almost the same. Oops. No. Oh, now it's telling me that this guy, so now it knows that this guy may throw an exception. So I need to also do it. So that means that main may throw an exception. So I need to do it here. Throws exception. And I get the same behavior, except that now I threw an exception, right? Now, if I do a try catch, try, and in here I put which kind of exception do I want to catch. System.out.println exception was thrown plus e.message get message. I save it, I run it, and right, this throws the exception. It tells me that. Maybe I want a semicolon here or something like that. Now, main doesn't throw an exception, so I don't really need this anymore. In fact, it is really a bad practice to have a throws exception in main. But I do it sometimes, especially for examples. So this illustrates how to throw an exception. You just throw, and then whatever you want, probably a new object. And this illustrates how to do a try catch. It also illustrates that you need to declare when you throw exceptions, except subclasses of runtime exception. And it illustrates how to do a try catch block.